Here are the 10 precons I have to recommend to you. Now these are in no particular order, so let's start with Reap the Tides. Our commander is AC, Tyrant of Gyre Strait. This is 6 mana, but it's a 5/5 serpent that lets us play additional lands on each of our turns, and when a land enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card. If you're looking into a landfall deck, this is a great one to get started with, and I think this is also a great beginner's deck as well. Sadly, the price will not show that because this was a very sought after deck, and it was a good one as well. There's going to be a huge amount of sea monsters, and they have a lot of power and a lot of toughness, typically over 6/6s. And we're able to cast these huge creatures because we have the mana to do so. We're drawing a bunch of cards. Our commander sets us up perfectly for what this deck wants to do. Next, I'm going to be talking about Silverquill Statement. This was a different kind of deck that we saw. It was black and white, has +1/+1 counters. And what's great about our commander is that Brina the Demagogue for 3 mana, which is a great start for any commander deck. We got a 1/3 bird warlock with flying. Whenever a player attacks one or more of your opponents, if that opponent has more life than another one of your opponents, that attacking player draws a card and you get 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature you control. This takes a new approach on black and white. We're promoting combat. Whoever attacks the player that does not have the least amount of life, so any of the other 3 players, but that means also excluding us because they cannot be attacking us because it has to be one of our opponents. So slowly they can chip away at our opponents. We get counters that we're benefiting from. We can also give out tokens. This was a really sweet one. Next, we're talking about Planar Portal. Our commander is Prosper Tomebound, and this is an amazing deck that takes advantage of exiled cards. For 4 mana, we get a 1/4 Tiefling Warlock with Death Touch, and Prosper says at the beginning of our end step, we're going to exile the top card of our library. And until our next turn, we can play that card. And also, if we play a card from exile, we get to create a treasure token, and luckily it doesn't specify it has to be that exiled card from Prosper. It can be any exiled card that we have and we can take advantage of, and this deck does that. It's a really fun deck and even takes advantage of treasure tokens. So if you love that theme, I really recommend trying this deck out, even the exiled theme. Next, we're talking about Lorehold Legacies with our commander Osgir the Reconstructor. For 4 mana, we get a 4/4 giant artificer that has vigilance. We can also pay 1 and sack an artifact, and target creature we control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. We can also pay X and tap Osgir to exile an artifact card with mana value X or less from your graveyard, and then we're going to create 2 copies of that, but we can only activate this as a sorcery, so we can only do this on our turn. This is a really sweet deck, and I love this one. It takes advantage of getting us copies, so if we have really good creatures that happen to be artifacts in our graveyard, our commander is going to be able to take advantage of that. So we have Wormcoil Engine. It already makes us 2 tokens when it dies, so getting 2 copies of those is even better. Also, the card draw in this deck can be really sweet with a few upgrades as well. Next, we're talking about Exit from Exile. Our commander is Faldorn Dreadwolf Herald. For 3 mana, we get a 3/3 human druid. Whenever you cast a spell from exile or a land enters the battlefield under your control from exile, we're going to create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. We can also pay 1, tap Faldorn, and discard a card, and this will let us exile the top card of our library, which is promoting what we want to do. We want to play exiled spells. We want our lands to enter the battlefield from exile, and we can play that card this turn. This deck gives a lot of the same vibes as Planar Portal, as I mentioned earlier. If you love playing exiled spells, this commander and this deck gets to take advantage of that, so I really recommend this one. Next, let's talk about Mishra's Burnished Banner. Our commander is Mishra Eminent 1. This does cost us 5 mana, but we do get a 5/4 human artificer. And it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of non-target creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's Warform, and it's a 4/4 construct artifact creature in addition to its other types. It gains haste until end of turn, and then we have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This deck is all about value, and if you love that kind of magic, then this is a deck I really have to recommend to you. Since we're making these copies over and over during our combat, we get that 4/4. This gets to take advantage of ETBs. So we may have an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, you get to destroy target creature, or you get to draw a card. And if we get to do this each turn during our combat, Mishra really gets to take advantage of ETBs, like I said, leaving the battlefield or sacrificing. So if you're looking for value, this is one I have to recommend. Next, I want to talk about Rebellion Rising, and our commander is Nayali Sun's Vanguard. For 2 red and a white, we get a 3/3 human rebel that says attacking tokens you control have double strike, which makes sense because we're a red and white deck and we want to be combat focused. But what's even better is the second part of Nayali. Whenever one or more tokens tokens you control attack a player, exile the top card of your library. During any turn you attack with a token, you may play that card. So this is very token focused, but for a precon, this is very powerful because we now have a substitute for card draw by exiling the top card of our library. So if we hit all 3 opponents, we get to exile 3 cards. Even if we attack with 2 tokens at 1 player, we're still getting 1 card. So we are focused on hitting as many players as possible. This was a really sweet deck and I really have to recommend it. Let's talk about Coven Counters. This was the unloved deck from Midnight Hunt. So this and the zombie deck came out in the same time, and of course everybody drew to the zombie deck, which is completely fine, but I feel like this deck is super underrated, especially with our commander Lenore Autumn Sovereign. This is all about Coven, which means we're focused on 3 creatures having different powers on our battlefield at the same time. But let's read it, and it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, draw a card. What's great is that Lenore has 0 power, so we already have that 1 checked off. And if we end up casting a Llanowar Elves that happens to be a 1/1, that meets 2 out of the 3 requirement for us to start drawing cards. We can still put +1/+1 counters on a creature, which helps us promote drawing cards. This deck is super sweet. You just add cards that have Coven and it works super well. You can play a huge amount of tokens or cards that create tokens that have different powers and different toughnesses. Again, we're focusing on the different powers, but vastly different creatures, and Lenore loves it. This whole deck loves it. We just care about creatures on our battlefield, drawing cards, +1/+1 counters. Lenore promotes all of that, and this deck is super sweet despite being unloved. Next, I want to talk about Riveteers Rampage. Our commander is Henzi Toolbox Tori. For black, red, and green, we get a 3/3 Devil Rogue. Each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. You may choose to cast that spell for its Blitz cost. If you do, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card. We also have to sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. But here's where the benefit comes from. Blitz cost you pay cost 1 less for each time you cast your commander from the command zone this game. So our commander dying is not harmful at all, actually. We get to reduce the cost of our creatures if we decide to cast them with the Blitz cost. So we can get huge creatures, we get a discount for it, they will be sacrificed, but we get to draw a card when they die, they gain haste, so we can play a huge creature that normally doesn't have haste, deal a huge amount of damage, it will die, but we'll find ways to bring it back, and this deck does really well with it. We get benefit from our creatures dying, such as Solemn Simulacrum. When it dies, we get to draw a card, so we'll be able to draw 2 cards if we have our commander out, and we had its Blitz cost going on. So another deck that really revolves around value, graveyard interaction, putting out huge creatures, and our commander doesn't care if it dies. It's that kind of deck, and it's that good. Let's talk about the Buckle Up Precon. Our commander is Kotori Pilot Prodigy. For 1 white blue, we get a 2/4 Moonfolk Pilot. Vehicles you control have crew 2, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, target artifact creature you control gains lifelink and vigilance until end of turn. Another really sweet deck here, and I really enjoyed it, and I normally don't enjoy vehicle decks, but this one just, you get to cheat out a lot of things because now we have crew 2 to things that would normally maybe have crew 6, crew 8, and this deck comes with some of those cool vehicles, and those upgrades that we could be putting in this deck probably going to be around $20. So if you can find this deck for a good price, or just find the singles all for a good price and add those upgrades, you're probably looking at a $50 deck. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love this one right here on the screen. Thank you to the members who help support this show. You can also become a member for 99 cents each month by hitting that join button down below, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.